rainwater dripping from his Italian leather shoes onto the cracked concrete floor. In his hand was a photograph, just a simple photograph, but the face staring back at him from that faded piece of paper made his blood run cold. The boy in the picture had his eyes, his nose, his exact smile. A smile Victor hadn't worn in 15 years. The mansion behind him stood silent in the rain, all 23 rooms of it, each one more empty than the last. But this small room, barely large enough for a bed and a wooden chair, this room held a secret that would bring his entire world crashing down. Before we continue, if you're watching from the UK, United States, Canada, South Africa, Barbados, Spain, or anywhere else in the world, drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you love stories that reveal the hidden truths behind closed doors, hit that subscribe button right now, because what you're about to hear will shake you to your core. This is the story of a man who had everything, and the photograph that showed him he had nothing at all. Victor Kanu was 42 years old and worth over 200 million naira. His real estate empire stretched across Abuja, Lagos, and Port Harcourt. Politicians sought his favor. Businessmen envied his success. His mansion in Maitama was the kind of place that made people stop their cars just to stare through the gates. Marble floors imported from Italy, chandeliers that cost more than most people earned in a year, a swimming pool that sparkled like diamonds under the Nigerian sun. But inside that beautiful house, there was no warmth, no laughter, no love. His wife, Stella, moved through the rooms like a ghost, her smile as polished and fake as the designer handbags she collected. They slept in separate bedrooms. They ate breakfast in silence. They raised their two children, Tunde and Ngozi, like business partners managing a joint venture, not lovers who had once promised forever. Victor told himself this was normal. This was what happened when you built an empire. Sacrifices had to be made. Romance was for poor people with time to waste. He had deals to close, properties to acquire, millions to make. And then came that rainy evening in September. The leak started in the servants' quarters during a thunderstorm. Water poured through a crack in the ceiling, soaking everything in the small room where Amina, the housemaid, lived. She had worked for the Kanu family for 4 years, invisible and silent, the way good help should be. She earned 45,000 naira a month, barely enough to survive, and sent most of it away to Kaduna for reasons Victor had never bothered to ask about. He wouldn't have gone to check the damage himself. That wasn't his job. But his estate manager was off sick, and Stella had already left for her monthly spa weekend in Lagos. So Victor grabbed an umbrella and walked through the rain to the boys' quarters, annoyed that he had to deal with such trivial matters. The door was unlocked. Amina was out buying groceries. Victor stepped inside and immediately wrinkled his nose at the stark poverty of the space. A narrow bed with sheets washed so many times they turned gray. A wooden chair missing one leg, propped up with old newspapers. A small cupboard that didn't close properly. This was where his employee lived, just meters away from his mansion with its 7 bathrooms and home cinema. For a moment, something like shame flickered in his chest. But Victor Kanu had learned long ago how to push uncomfortable feelings aside. He inspected the ceiling, made a mental note to have it repaired, and turned to leave. That's when he saw it. A cardboard box had fallen from the top of the cupboard, knocked down by the leaking water. Its contents had spilled across the wet floor. Old letters, a worn Bible, a wooden rosary, and photographs. Dozens of photographs. Victor bent down, intending to pile everything back into the box before Amina returned. His hand touched a photo frame, and he lifted it to shake off the water. Then he saw the boy. The world seemed to tilt sideways. The child in the photograph was around 10 or 11 years old, standing in front of a primary school, wearing a faded uniform that had been washed too many times. He was smiling, holding up a certificate of some kind. But it wasn't the certificate that made Victor's hands start to shake. It was the face. The boy had Victor's deep-set eyes, the same unusual amber color that people always commented on, the same slightly crooked front tooth that Victor had refused to get fixed because his mother said it gave him character, the same way of tilting his head when he smiled, like he was sharing a secret joke with the camera. Victor had seen this face before. Every morning in the mirror, 30 years ago, His mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Who was this child? Why did Amina have his photograph? And why, dear God, did he look exactly like Victor had looked as a boy? He turned the frame over with trembling fingers. On the back, written in faded blue ink, were 3 words: Obinna, age 10. Obinna. The name meant nothing to Victor. But the face, that face meant everything. He looked around the small room with new eyes, searching for more clues, more answers. His gaze fell on another photograph, this one unframed, tucked halfway under the fallen box. He pulled it out carefully, and his world shattered completely. The photograph showed a woman. Even after 15 years, even though she looked thinner and more tired than he remembered, Victor recognized her immediately. Her name exploded in his mind like a gunshot. Mercy. Mercy Okafor. The only woman he had ever truly loved. The woman he had abandoned 15 years ago when opportunity called from across the ocean. The woman whose number he had stopped calling, whose emails he had stopped answering, whose memory he had buried beneath layers of ambition and success. She was standing in the same spot as the boy, in front of the same school, her arm around his shoulders, mother and son. The resemblance between them was unmistakable, but the resemblance between the boy and Victor was even stronger. Victor's legs gave out. He sat down hard on Amina's bed, the photographs clutched in his shaking hands, rain drumming on the roof above him. Obinna. Mercy's son. No, his son. The timeline crashed through his mind like a freight train. 15 years ago, he and Mercy had been inseparable at the University of Ibadan. They were going to get married after graduation. They had planned their whole future together, and then the scholarship letter arrived, a full ride to study for an MBA in London, the opportunity of a lifetime. Mercy had begged him not to go. No, that wasn't true. Mercy had never begged for anything. She had simply asked him to wait 1 more year, finish his master's degree in Nigeria. They could go abroad together afterward. But Victor had been 23 years old and drunk on the promise of a bigger life. He told her he would call every day. He promised to send for her once he was settled. He swore that distance wouldn't change anything. He had lied. Not intentionally at first. The first month in London, he called 3 times a week. The second month, once a week. By the third month, her calls started going to voicemail. Her emails sat unread in his inbox. There was always a reason, always an excuse. He was busy with classes, busy with networking events, busy building the future he had dreamed of. The truth was simpler and uglier. London had opened doors Victor never knew existed. Wealthy classmates from influential families, parties in Kensington, internships at firms where people wore watches that cost more than his father earned in 5 years. And Mercy, beautiful, loyal Mercy back in Nigeria, started to feel like an anchor tied to his past, a past he was desperate to leave behind. So he cut the rope. He stopped answering her calls altogether, changed his phone number, created a new email address. When he came back to Nigeria 4 years later with his MBA and connections that would launch his business empire, he made sure to stay away from Ibadan. He told himself Mercy had probably moved on, found someone better, forgotten all about him. He had never allowed himself to consider another possibility, that she had been carrying his child when he left. Victor sat in that small room, surrounded by the evidence of Amina's poverty, holding proof of his greatest betrayal. The rain had stopped, but he could hear water still dripping through the ceiling, each drop like an accusation. Drip. You abandoned her. Drip. You have a son. Drip. You didn't even know. How could he not have known? But even as the question formed, Victor realized the answer. He hadn't known because he hadn't wanted to know. He had burned every bridge, severed every connection, made it impossible for Mercy to reach him. If she had tried to tell him about the pregnancy, her messages would have bounced back from dead email addresses. Her calls would have rung on disconnected numbers. She had no way to find him, and he had made sure of it. Victor heard footsteps outside. He quickly shoved the photographs back into the box, his hands clumsy with panic. He couldn't let Amina find him here, going through her private belongings. But even as he tried to restore everything to how it was, his mind was spinning with questions. Who was Amina? How did she have these photographs? Where was Mercy now? And most terrifying of all, where was the boy? Where was Obinna? The footsteps passed by. Not Amina, just one of the security guards making his rounds. Victor exhaled slowly, trying to calm his racing heart. He needed to think. He needed a plan. But his thoughts kept fracturing, splintering into 1,000 directions at once. If the boy was 11 years old now, that meant Mercy had been pregnant when Victor left. Had she known? Had she tried to tell him? The guilt that crashed over him was so heavy he could barely breathe. All these years while he was building his empire, buying mansions, collecting luxury cars, his son had been growing up somewhere without a father, without support, without even knowing who Victor was. And Mercy. God, what had happened to Mercy? Victor forced himself to stand. He couldn't stay in this room any longer. He couldn't risk Amina returning and finding him here. But as he moved toward the door, his eyes caught on something else. A small notebook, half hidden under the bed. Before his conscience could stop him, Victor grabbed it and flipped it open. It was a record of Amina's expenses, every naira accounted for in neat handwriting. Rent for a one-room apartment in Kaduna, 12,000 naira. School fees for Obinna, 8,000 naira. Food, 10,000 naira. Medical bills, 6,000 naira. The list went on and on, stretching back months, each entry a testament to how carefully Amina stretched her meager salary to cover two people's lives. Victor's throat tightened. This woman, his housemaid who he barely acknowledged, who he paid poverty wages to clean his toilets and wash his floors, had been supporting his son. His son. While Victor spent more on a single dinner than Amina earned in a month, she had been sacrificing everything to keep a child fed and in school. A child Victor didn't even know existed. He heard voices now. Amina had returned, talking to someone near the main house. Victor quickly replaced the notebook and slipped out of the room, pulling the door closed behind him. He walked back to his mansion in a daze, his clothes still damp from the rain, his mind reeling. Inside the vast emptiness of his 23-room house, Victor went straight to his study and locked the door. He poured himself 3 fingers of whiskey and drank it in one burning gulp. Then he poured another. Stella was in Lagos. The children were at a birthday party. The house staff knew better than to disturb him when the study door was closed. Victor was alone with the truth that was tearing him apart. He had a son named Obinna who looked exactly like him, a son who was 11 years old and living in Kaduna on scraps, while Victor's legitimate children wanted for nothing. Tundi had just gotten a new PlayStation 5 for his birthday. Gozi's bedroom looked like a toy store. They attended the most expensive international school in Abuja, wore designer clothes, traveled abroad twice a year. And Obinna? Obinna wore a faded school uniform and lived in a one-room apartment that cost 12,000 naira a month. The unfairness of it crashed over Victor like a wave. But worse than the unfairness was the realization that this was his fault. All of it. Every bit of suffering Mercy had endured. Every struggle Obinna had faced. Every sacrifice Amina had made. It all traced back to one selfish decision 15 years ago. Victor's hands shook as he poured a third glass of whiskey. He was a man who prided himself on control, on logic, on making rational decisions. But there was nothing rational about what he was feeling now. Guilt, shame, grief for a woman he had loved and abandoned, fear of what this revelation would do to the life he had built, and underneath it all, something else. Something he hadn't felt in so long, he almost didn't recognize it. Longing. He wanted to see his son. He wanted to meet this boy who carried his face, his blood, his DNA. He wanted to know what Obinna liked, what he dreamed about, whether he was good at football like Victor had been. He wanted to hear his voice, see him smile, make up for 11 years of absence. But how? If he acknowledged Obinna, everything would fall apart. Stella would leave him, and she would take Tunde and Ngozi with her. His reputation in the business community would be damaged. People would whisper about the great Victor Kanu who abandoned his firstborn son. His carefully constructed image would crumble. But if he stayed silent, if he pretended he never saw those photographs, he would have to live the rest of his life knowing he had a son out there struggling in poverty while he lived in luxury. Could he do that? Could he look at himself in the mirror every morning, knowing he had made that choice? Victor didn't have an answer. The sun was setting outside his study window, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Beautiful, like Abuja always was at this time of day. But Victor saw none of it. He sat in his leather chair, in his expensive study, in his empty mansion, and felt more lost than he had ever felt in his entire life. He needed information. He needed to understand the full picture before he could make any decisions. And there was only one person who could give him that information: Amina. But he couldn't just confront her directly. She would shut down, maybe even run. He needed to be careful, strategic. He needed to investigate first, gather facts, understand the situation completely. Victor Kanu was good at strategy. It was how he had built his empire. Now he would use those same skills to uncover the truth about the son he never knew he had. He picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the name he was looking for. Mr. Oho, a private investigator Victor had used before for business matters. Discreet, thorough, expensive. The phone rang twice before Mr. Oho answered. Victor's voice was steady when he spoke. Years of business negotiations teaching him how to hide emotion. He gave Mr. Oho a simple assignment: find out everything about Amina Ibrahim, where she came from, who her family was, why she sent money to Kaduna every month, and most importantly, any connection she might have to a woman named Mercy Okafor. He didn't mention the photograph. He didn't mention the boy. Not yet. Victor had learned long ago that information was power, and he needed to control how much power he gave away. Mr. Oho promised results within 48 hours. Victor hung up and sat back in his chair, the whiskey glass empty in his hand. 2 days. He had to pretend everything was normal for 2 days while his entire world was spinning off its axis. The front door opened downstairs. Children's voices filled the mansion. Tunda and Ngozi were home from the birthday party, their laughter echoing through the marble hallways. Victor listened to them chattering about cake and games and presents, their voices so innocent, so unaware that their father's life was falling apart one floor above them. He should go down, be a father, ask about their day, but he couldn't move. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that photograph, Obinna's face, Mercy's face, the life he had destroyed without even knowing it. A soft knock on the study door made him jump. Amina's voice, quiet and respectful as always. "Dinner is ready, sir. Should I set a place for you?" Victor's throat went dry. For 4 years, this woman had worked in his house. 4 years of serving his family, cleaning his home, living in that tiny room with her secrets. How many times had she looked at Tunde and Ngozi and thought about Obinna? How many times had she bitten her tongue while Victor complained about minor inconveniences, knowing she was raising his son on scraps? "No," he managed to say. "I'm not hungry. You can go." Her footsteps retreated down the hallway. Victor released a breath he didn't know he was holding. The next 48 hours were torture. Stella returned from Lagos in her usual cloud of expensive perfume and quiet dissatisfaction. She barely looked at Victor, which was normal. They moved around each other like planets in separate orbits, sharing space but never touching, never connecting. Victor went through the motions. He attended meetings, reviewed contracts, made phone calls. But his mind was elsewhere, constantly drifting back to that small room, that photograph, that face so much like his own. He watched Amina with new eyes now. She was young, probably in her mid-20s, with the kind of face that would have been beautiful if it wasn't so worn down by hardship. She moved through the house like a shadow, efficient and invisible, the way good servants were supposed to be. But now Victor noticed things he had never noticed before. The way her hands were rough and cracked from constant cleaning. The way her uniform hung loose on her thin frame because she probably skipped meals to send more money to Kaduna. The way she never made eye contact with anyone, as if she had learned long ago that invisibility was safer than being seen. What did she know? Had Mercy told her everything? Did she know that the man whose floors she scrubbed was the father of the child she helped raise? On the second evening, Victor's phone rang. "Mr. Oho." The investigator's voice was professional and matter-of-fact, the way it always was when delivering information that would destroy someone's life. The report was thorough. Amina Ibrahim was 26 years old, originally from Kaduna. She had come to Abuja 4 years ago seeking work. No criminal record, no debts. By all accounts, a model employee. But here's where it got interesting, Mr. Oho said. Amina had a sister, an older sister who had died 3 years ago. Her name was Mercy Okafor. Victor's heart stopped. Mercy had taken her husband's name after marriage, Mr. Oho continued, oblivious to the bomb he had just dropped. She married a man named Joseph Okafor when she was 6 months pregnant. He adopted the child as his own. They lived quietly in Kaduna. Joseph was a teacher. Mercy worked as a nurse at a community clinic. The words hit Victor like physical blows. Mercy had married someone else, someone who had been there for her when Victor abandoned her, someone who had given Obinna his name, raised him as his own son, been the father Victor should have been. Mr. Oho's voice continued, relentless. Joseph Okafor died in a car accident 4 years ago. Mercy struggled to support herself and the boy on her nurse's salary. She developed breast cancer 2 years later. Stage 4 by the time they caught it. She died 14 months ago. The phone nearly slipped from Victor's hand. Mercy was dead. The woman he had loved, the mother of his child, was dead. And he hadn't known, hadn't been there, hadn't even had the chance to apologize. Before she died, Mr. Oho went on, Mercy called her younger sister Amina to Kaduna, made her promise to look after Obinna. Amina took a job in Abuja to earn more money. She sends most of her salary back to pay for a woman in their neighborhood who watches the boy while he's not in school. The child doesn't know his biological father's identity. Mercy never told him. Victor's voice came out as a whisper. Where is the boy now? Still in Kaduna, living in the same one-room apartment where he grew up. Good student, according to my sources. Quiet kid, stays out of trouble. Top of his class in mathematics. Mathematics. Victor had been top of his class in mathematics too. Is there anything else you need? Mr. Oho asked. No. Send me the full report. And Mr. Oho, this conversation never happened. Understood. Victor hung up and sat in the silence of his study, the weight of the truth crushing him. Mercy was gone. She had lived her whole life just a few hours away in Kaduna, struggling, suffering, dying, and he had never known, never checked, never cared enough to find out what had happened to the woman he once promised forever to. And now their son, his son, was living alone in a one-room apartment, dependent on the charity of neighbors and the sacrifice of an aunt who could barely afford to feed herself. The guilt was suffocating, but beneath the guilt was something sharper, something that cut deeper. Regret. Not just regret for abandoning Mercy. Regret for every choice he had made in the last 15 years. He had built an empire, yes. He had money and power and success. But what did he have, really? A wife who couldn't stand to be in the same room with him. Children who saw him as a wallet, not a father. A mansion that felt like a mausoleum. And somewhere in Kaduna, a son who didn't even know his name. Victor stood up and walked to the window. The grounds of his estate stretched out before him, perfectly manicured lawns and imported trees, every inch of it designed to show the world how successful he was. But standing there in his custom-made suit, in his climate-controlled study, looking out at his monuments to materialism, Victor Kanu felt like the poorest man in Nigeria. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Amina again, her voice soft through the wood. Sir, your dinner is getting cold. Should I warm it up? Something inside Victor snapped. He strode to the door and yanked it open. Amina stood there, startled by his sudden movement, her eyes wide with fear. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Victor saw the recognition in her eyes. She knew. She had always known. Every time she looked at him, she saw the man who had abandoned her sister. The man who had left Mercy pregnant and alone. The man who lived in luxury while his own son scraped by on nothing. Come in, Victor said quietly. We need to talk. Amina's face went pale. Sir, I can come back later if... Now, Amina, please. She stepped into the study like someone walking to their execution. Victor closed the door behind her and gestured to one of the leather chairs. She remained standing, her hands clasped in front of her, her whole body rigid with tension. Sit down, Victor said, trying to make his voice gentle. You're not in trouble. She sat on the very edge of the chair, ready to bolt at any moment. Victor poured himself another whiskey, his hands steadier now that the moment of truth had arrived. He didn't offer her any. The power dynamics in the room were already complicated enough. I know about Obinna, Victor said simply. The color drained completely from Amina's face. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. I found the photographs in your room, Victor continued. When I went to check the leak, I didn't mean to invade your privacy, but I saw them, and I had them investigated. I know everything, Amina. I know Mercy was your sister. I know she died. I know you've been supporting my son. The word hung in the air between them. My son. Amina's eyes filled with tears. She looked down at her hands, her voice barely a whisper when she finally spoke. She made me promise not to tell you. Victor felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. What? Mercy. Before she died. She made me swear I would never contact you, never tell you about Obinna. She said you had made your choice 15 years ago, and she wouldn't force you. Her voice broke. Tears streamed down her face now, years of grief and burden finally breaking through. Victor felt his own eyes burning. She wouldn't force me to what? Amina wiped her face with the back of her hand, struggling to compose herself. She wouldn't force you to be a father if you didn't want to be one. She said she had loved you once, but that love died when you stopped answering her calls. She said Obinna deserved better than a father who had to be guilted into caring about him. The words were like knives, each one finding its mark. Victor sat down heavily in his chair, all the air gone from his lungs. Did she tell Obinna about me? No. Amina's voice was firm now, protective. She told him that his father was Joseph, that Joseph had loved him and chosen him, and that was all that mattered. When Joseph died, Obinna cried for weeks. That man raised him, sir. That man was at every school event, every football match, every parent-teacher conference. That man sat up with him when he had nightmares. That man was his father in every way that counts. And I was nothing, Victor finished quietly. Amina didn't argue. The silence that followed was answer enough. Victor stood and walked to his desk. He opened a drawer and pulled out his checkbook. Amina's eyes widened with panic. Sir, please, I don't want money. I just want to keep my job. I need to support Obinna. Please don't fire me. The desperation in her voice stopped Victor's hand. Fire you? Amina, why would I fire you? Because I kept this secret. Because I lied by not telling you. Because you did exactly what your sister asked you to do. Victor's voice was gentle now, filled with a sadness that came from somewhere deep inside. You've been more of a parent to my son than I ever was. You've sacrificed everything for him. I'm not going to fire you, Amina. I'm going to help you. He wrote a check, his hand moving across the paper with decisive strokes. When he tore it off and held it out to her, Amina's eyes went wide with shock. 2 million naira. Sir, I can't accept this. It's too much. It's not nearly enough. Victor's voice cracked. It's not even close to what I owe, but it's a start. Use it for Obinna. Better housing, better school, medical care, whatever he needs. Amina stared at the check like it might disappear if she touched it. But Mercy said, Mercy was protecting her son from a man who didn't deserve him. Victor sat back down, suddenly exhausted. She was right to do that. But she's gone now, and Obinna is still here. He's my son, Amina, my flesh and blood, and I've already missed 11 years of his life. I can't get those years back, but I can make sure he has a future. Amina took the check with trembling hands. Her tears started again, but this time they were different. Relief mixed with grief, mixed with something that might have been hope. There's just one condition, Victor said quietly. I want to meet him. Amina's head snapped up. Sir, I don't think that's a good idea. He doesn't know who you are. It would confuse him, upset him, I know. Victor leaned forward, his hands clasped together. I'm not asking to tell him I'm his father. Not yet. Maybe not ever if you think that's best. But I need to see him, Amina. Just once. Please. The two of them sat in that study, employer and employee, father and aunt. both of them bound together by a child neither of them knew how to protect. Outside, the Abuja night had fallen, wrapping the mansion in darkness. But inside that room, something was shifting. Something was changing. Finally, Amina nodded. There's a football match at his school next Saturday. He plays striker. You could come, just as a visitor. He wouldn't have to know. Victor felt something loosen in his chest. Thank you. Amina stood to leave, the check still clutched in her hand like a lifeline. At the door, she paused and turned back. Sir, can I ask you something? Anything. Why now? You could have kept pretending you didn't know. You could have let me keep sending the small amounts I can afford. Why are you doing this? Victor was quiet for a long moment, thinking about that question. Because I've spent 15 years running from my past, he said finally, building bigger houses and bigger businesses, trying to fill a hole inside me with money and success. But that hole just kept getting bigger, and now I know why. I lost the only woman I ever loved because I was too selfish to see what mattered. I abandoned my own son before he was even born. I built an empire on sand, Amina, and I'm tired of pretending it means anything. Amina nodded slowly, understanding, passing between them. She left quietly, closing the door behind her. Victor sat alone in his study for a long time after that. Eventually, he heard Stella's footsteps in the hallway outside, pausing for a moment at his door before moving on to her separate bedroom. He heard Tunde and Ngozi arguing over a video game downstairs. He heard the night security guard making his rounds. All the sounds of his expensive, empty life. The following Saturday, Victor told Stella he had a business meeting in Kaduna. It wasn't entirely a lie. This was business, the most important business of his life. He drove the 3 hours himself, refusing his driver's offer to take him. The highway stretched out before him, taking him away from Abuja's gleaming towers and towards something he couldn't quite name. Fear, maybe, or redemption, or just the chance to see his son's face in person, not just in a faded photograph. The school was nothing like the international academy his other children attended. It was a modest concrete building with peeling paint and a dusty football field behind it. Parents and relatives gathered on the sidelines, sitting on wooden benches or standing in the shade of scraggly trees. Victor felt completely out of place in his designer clothes and expensive watch, but nobody paid him much attention. Just another parent come to watch the match. Amina found him in the crowd. She didn't greet him, didn't acknowledge knowing him. She just caught his eye and nodded toward the field where the boys were warming up. And there he was. Obinna. Victor's breath caught in his throat. Seeing the boy in person was completely different from seeing his photograph. He was small for 11, wiry and quick, with that same intensity Victor remembered having at that age. His football jersey was too big on him. Probably a hand-me-down. His boots were scuffed and worn. But when he smiled at something, his teammate said, Victor saw Mercy's smile, bright and genuine and full of life. His son. The match started, and Victor couldn't take his eyes off Obinna. The boy played with passion and skill, weaving through defenders, calling for passes, encouraging his teammates. He scored 2 goals, and each time Victor felt a surge of pride so intense it hurt. That's my son, he wanted to shout. That brilliant, beautiful boy is mine. But he stayed silent, because Obinna wasn't really his, not in any way that mattered. Victor had contributed DNA, nothing more. He hadn't earned the right to claim this child. At halftime, Obinna ran to the sideline where an elderly woman waited with a water bottle. She wiped the sweat from his face and said something that made him laugh. The neighbor, Victor realized. The woman Amina paid to watch over Obinna while she worked in Abuja. Another stranger who had done more for his son than he ever had. The second half was tighter, more intense. Obinna's team was down by 1 goal with 5 minutes left. Victor found himself leaning forward, heart pounding, completely caught up in the drama. Come on, he whispered under his breath. You can do this. And Obinna did. With 2 minutes left, he intercepted a pass, dribbled past 3 defenders, and scored the equalizing goal. The small crowd erupted in cheers. Obinna's teammates mobbed him, jumping on him in celebration. And through it all, the boy kept that same smile, Mercy's smile, the smile of someone who found joy in simple things. Victor felt tears running down his face. He didn't try to hide them. After the match, he watched from a distance as Obinna packed up his things. The boy moved with the careful economy of someone who had learned not to waste anything, folding his jersey neatly, checking that he had all his belongings before leaving. Small gestures, but they spoke volumes about the life he lived. Amina appeared at Victor's side. "Did you see him?" "Yes." Victor's voice was hoarse. "He's incredible." "He is." Amina's voice was soft with pride. "He wants to be an engineer someday. Builds things out of scrap metal and wire. Smart as a whip, his teachers say. Like his mother, Victor said. Yes, like Mercy. They stood together in silence, watching Obinna walk away with the neighbor woman, his small figure disappearing into the Kaduna afternoon. "I need to do more," Victor said suddenly. "The money isn't enough. I need to make sure he has everything. The best schools, the best opportunities. Everything I gave Tunde and Ngozi, he deserves the same." Amina turned to look at him, really look at him. For the first time since he had discovered the truth, Amina turned to look at him, really look at him. For the first time since he had discovered the truth. "He's not a project, sir. He's not a business deal you can fix with money. I know that. But do you?" Amina's voice was sharper now, protective. "Because Obinna has had a hard life, yes. But he's also had love, real love. From Mercy, from Joseph, from the neighbors who check on him, from me. He's not some charity case waiting to be rescued by a rich man who suddenly remembered he exists." The words stung because they were true. "I'm not trying to rescue him," Victor said quietly. "I'm trying to be responsible. To do what I should have done 11 years ago." 11 years too late doesn't earn you Father of the Year." Mina's eyes flashed. "That boy in there. He has dreams. He has hopes. He has a life that doesn't include you. And maybe that's how it should stay." Victor felt something crack open inside him. "Then why did you let me come here? Why did you show him to me? Because you have a right to see him. Once. But seeing him doesn't make you his father, sir. Being there makes you a father. Showing up makes you a father. Loving someone when it's hard and inconvenient and doesn't benefit you, that makes you a father. Can you do that?" The question hung in the air between them. Could he? Could Victor Kanu, who had spent 15 years running from inconvenient truths, actually commit to being present for a son who didn't even know who he was? "I don't know," Victor admitted, "but I want to try." Amina studied his face for a long moment. Finally, she nodded. "Then start small. Don't try to change his whole life overnight. Just be consistent. Show up. Prove you're not going to disappear again when things get complicated." "How?" Amina thought for a moment. "His school needs funding. The football program is barely surviving. The library has no books. You could help with that. Anonymously, let him benefit without knowing it's from you. And what about later, when he's older? Do I ever tell him the truth?" "I don't know, sir." Amina's voice softened. "That's something we figure out together. One day at a time." Victor nodded slowly. One day at a time. It wasn't the grand gesture he had imagined. It wasn't the dramatic revelation where he swept in and saved the day. It was smaller than that, quieter, more uncertain. But maybe that was what real fatherhood looked like. Not the Instagram perfect moments, not the expensive gifts, just showing up, being consistent, earning trust one small action at a time. The drive back to Abu felt different. The same highway, the same landmarks, but Victor saw them through new eyes. He had spent so many years focused on the destination, on getting ahead, on reaching the next milestone. He had forgotten to pay attention to what he was leaving behind along the way. When he got home, the mansion felt even emptier than before. Stella was in her room with the door closed. Tunde and Ngozi were absorbed in their devices, barely acknowledging his arrival. The staff moved like ghosts through the halls. Everything was exactly as he had left it, but Victor felt like a different person. He went to his study and opened his laptop. He drafted an email to his accountant, setting up a trust fund for Obinna's education. Then he contacted a foundation that supported underfunded schools in Kaduna, making an anonymous donation specifically earmarked for Obinna's school. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was a start. Over the following weeks, Victor fell into a routine. Every Saturday, he drove to Kaduna. Sometimes there were football matches. Sometimes he just sat in his car outside Obinna's apartment building, watching the boy play with neighborhood kids or walk to the market with his shopping bag. He never approached, never made contact, just watched his son live his life. Amina became his informant, updating him on Obinna's progress in school, his dreams, his struggles. She told him when Obinna scored the winning goal in the regional tournament. She told him when he built a small radio from scrap parts. She told him when he got sick with malaria and recovered. Every detail, Victor absorbed like a man dying of thirst. 3 months after that first football match, Amina came to his study with news. Obinna had been selected for a national mathematics competition. It was a huge honor, but there was a problem. The competition was in Lagos, and they couldn't afford the travel and accommodation costs. "Let me pay for it," Victor said immediately. Amina shook her head. "If you pay, it needs to come through the school. As a scholarship or something. He can't know it's from you." "Why not?" Victor's frustration was rising. "Why can't I just help my own son directly? Because he's not ready for that truth yet. And maybe you're not either. What does that mean?" "It means you're still treating this like a transaction." Amina's voice was gentle but firm. "You write checks and watch from a distance and think that makes you involved. But real parenthood isn't safe, sir. It's messy and complicated, and it requires you to actually be vulnerable. Are you ready for that?" "I'm here, aren't I?" "I'm trying. You're hovering. There's a difference." Amina sat down, something she rarely did in his presence. "My sister used to say that love isn't about grand gestures. It's about being there for the boring parts. The homework help, the scraped knees, the fights about bedtime. Joseph wasn't Obinna's biological father, but he was there for all of that. Can you be?" The question haunted Victor long after Amina left. Could he? Could he actually integrate this secret son into his life in any meaningful way? And what would that cost him? The answer came sooner than he expected. Stella found the bank statements. She had never paid attention to their finances before, content to spend freely while Victor made money. But something had made her curious, and she discovered the trust fund, the donations, the pattern of Saturday absences. One evening, she confronted him in his study, her face cold with fury. "Who is she? What?" "Don't play stupid, Victor. The money, the secret account, the trips to Kaduna every week. Who is your mistress?" For a moment, Victor almost laughed at the irony. His wife assumed infidelity was the only possible explanation for his behavior. It didn't occur to her that the truth might be even more complicated. "There's no mistress," he said quietly. "Then what?" Stella's voice rose. "What are you spending all this money on? What are you doing in Kaduna every Saturday?" Victor looked at his wife, really looked at her for the first time in years. They had built a life together based on appearance and convenience, not love. She had married him for his money and status. He had married her because she was beautiful and came from the right family. They had created 2 children in this loveless marriage, and those children were growing up with the same emptiness that consumed their parents. What did he owe Stella? Honesty? She had never wanted that. She wanted the mansion and the cars and the parties. She wanted the Instagram perfect life. Truth would only complicate that. But maybe complications were what they needed. "I have another son," Victor said simply. "From before we met. He's 11 years old. He lives in Kaduna. I just found out about him 3 months ago." Stella's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Shock, disbelief, rage, calculation. When she finally spoke, her voice was ice. "You have a bastard child." "I have a son," Victor corrected. "His name is Obinna, and yes, I'm supporting him financially, as I should have been doing all along." "Does he know about us? About Tunde and Ngozi?" "No, he doesn't even know I'm his father." Stella's laugh was bitter. "Of course he doesn't, because you're a coward, Victor. You've always been a coward. You hide behind money and power, but you're terrified of actual human connection." The accusation hit home because it was true. Victor had been hiding his whole life, from mercy, from responsibility, from himself. "You're right," he said quietly. I am a coward, but I'm trying to change that. By throwing money at a problem? That's not change. That's just what you always do. Stella grabbed her purse. I'm going back to Lagos. Don't follow me? I need to think. She left and Victor didn't try to stop her. Part of him felt relief. The facade of their marriage had been exhausting to maintain. Maybe its collapse was inevitable. But another part of him felt fear. If Stella left, if she took Tunde and Ngozi, if word got out about Obinna, his carefully constructed life would fall apart. Business deals would sour. Social invitations would dry up. The empire he had built would crack. Was Obinna worth that? The question shamed him even as he thought it. Of course his son was worth it. Any father would say that. But Victor was still learning how to be a father. Still learning that some things mattered more than reputation and money. Amina found him in his study the next morning, staring at nothing. Stella left last night, he said without preamble. She knows about Obinna. What did you tell her? Everything. Victor rubbed his eyes. And she's right, Amina. I am a coward. I've been hiding from this. From him, pretending that watching from a distance is enough. But it's not. So what are you going to do? Victor stood up, decision crystallizing. I'm going to meet my son, properly. I'm going to tell him who I am. Sir, I don't think I know what you think. And maybe you're right that he's not ready. But I've been waiting for the right time for 15 years, and there's never a right time. There's just now. If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe to my channel, give this video a thumbs up, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support means everything and helps me continue bringing you powerful stories like this one. Thank you,